Give us your take on Black Lives Matter, because this is something it feels like we're all kind of being pressured to speak about. What's your opinion on Black Lives Matter? Maybe the statement, maybe the group.
Oh, shoot. Are we out of time? I better head out of here. No, actually, I tweeted about this right now, so we'll see if I get fired or canceled. No, see, it's too. Whenever I put stuff out, it's too centered or try to be even-handed to generate too much controversy. I don't just fly off the handle. Here's what I just wrote this actually before our interview. I wrote this. I fully support the proposition Black Lives Matter and condemn individual, generational, and systemic racism wherever they exist. However, I do not support the organization Black Lives Matter because it promotes false pro-LGBT ideologies, and that is not a racist position. So, there you go.
Well, I mean, do they? I mean, because have you looked into the kind of institution Black Lives Matter and what they have to say about themselves? Or is it more that people who tend to say Black Lives Matter tend to also be trans activists?
It's hard because Black Lives Matter is somewhat of a decentralized social movement. So they're not like the NAACP with chapters, and they don't have a rigid hierarchy, but they have some leaders who identify as such and will speak to media. They have a website at least. So I'm going at least what's on their official website. Mm-hmm. And so on what we believe for Black Lives Matter, they have a lot where they talk about things like they want to dismantle cisgender privilege. They want to foster a queer affirming network.
This is on their website?
Yeah, it's at blacklivesmatter.com. You just click on what we believe.
What's difficult is the statement Black Lives Matter is something everybody agrees with, but then when somebody says, yeah, all lives matter, they take offense in the way others might take offense who say, the unborn matter, and someone replies, all lives matter. And then the person who says unborn lives matter is like, no, you don't understand it. Unborn, children are being, arbitrarily killed in the womb. And so there's obviously something behind the phrase that you have to agree with as well. The idea
I think that it's the phrase "all lives matter" is taken as something that's antagonistic towards Black Lives Matter or dismissive. And so that's why it's dismissive. So, and your analogy about the unborn, if we were to have a movement that said "unborn lives matter" and people said, "Well, all lives matter," we would consider it dismissive of the claim that we are making. So that's why I don't use that claim "all lives matter" as a replacement phrase. And people have asked me, well, what should I want to march and support this, but I don't want to support this organization. That's why I said I don't recommend then holding a sign Black Lives Matter, because it's also the name of the organization. And as I showed from their own website, they support anti-Christian ideals that break down the nature of the family, which I want to talk about here in a sec also.
Sure.
So I said, just march with a sign that says "End racism now" or "Racism is evil." To me, that is a very clear core message that we can all agree on and that we should march towards. Now, that being said, I have disagreements. So, for example, I believe that there is, like, my personal thoughts on racism in the United States. I believe that there is a fair amount of notice in my tweet I said there's individual, generational, and systemic racism. So we live in a country with 330 million people. You're going to find a lot of individual racists out there against all kinds of people, not just against blacks, but against Jews, against Asian Americans, against indigenous peoples. You'll have people who are racist against
Australians. That's a joke. Hispanics, yeah.
You're just you Crocodile Dundee people coming over here. Oh no, I'm talking just like you. What am I doing? So obviously that's wrong. The other two, generational racism, I believe that does exist in the sense that because our country in the United States, and this also happened in other countries around the world, you had that in Australia, with the treatment of Aborigines,
right.
That because of previous racist policies, undoing the policies cannot magically reverse the damage the policies did. And so even if you say, well, we don't do that anymore, it's like, yeah, but there's still residual damage that has come from that we can feel today that has left these groups in a less advantageous position. So I do believe that there is individual racism, there is generational racism that we have to overcome as remnants of past crimes. But I do not believe the United States engages in systemic racism. Systemic racism, I believe, would apply to the United States during the age of Jim Crow laws that prevented African Americans from voting and accessing public accommodations, when there was apartheid in South Africa. That to me is systemic racism. If you define systemic racism so broadly that it includes generational racism, then everybody's racist. That's why you have to be careful with these terms. If you define a term so that everybody's socialist or everybody's racist, but then nobody's socialist and nobody's racist.
Yeah, that's what I've found.
Helpful.
When I moved to America several years ago, even though we obviously have our race issues in Australia, being here, as I started listening to the news, it kind of felt like CNN kept telling me I was a racist, and I'd be like,
right.
no, I'm not. No, that proves that you bloody are. I'm like, well, I can't win this argument then.
Right.
So it would seem like the way people used to think of racism would be, you look down on another race, another ethnicity as somehow inferior to your own. Whereas now it feels like people want to redefine racism to mean something, as you say, so vague and so broad that all of us are guilty of it. So it's kind of difficult to fix then if we're not really defining it with hard edges.
It is. And I think also we have to be vigilant about racism. But at the same time, when people overreact to things, it's like the boy who cried wolf. If you say that something is racist when it's not, you start missing the things that actually are racist. So, for example, many people who are part of Black Lives Matter, others who are promoting, this idea of systemic racism, will try to tie what they call microaggressions into being racist. So, for example, one might be a microaggression would be if you have an African American friend who has very tight curly hair, and if you say something like, "I just love your hair. Oh, can I touch that? Oh, I love this." That's considered a microaggression. That it's a form of like implicit racism because you don't do that to other people.
That doesn't make sense to me. I was in Africa. I did that to little kids all the time. Their hair's awesome.
Yeah, and frankly, my own children.
I've done that to your hair.
People, when I let my hair grow out, people do that to me. People do that to my son all the time because he has hair that is. He was at the park the other day and he was playing with another child who is biracial, with a child whose mother was white and whose father is African American. And this girl, my son, had the same kind of hair. And people always go up to my kiddos with their lush, luxurious curly hair and want to touch it. To me, it's just more, annoying at sometimes, or a bit of fatherly pride. People see them as so cute. But my point is that with a microaggression, sometimes it may be an expression of implicit racism, but other times we have a word for it. It's faux pas. It's just don't be weird with other people and don't overreact to other people. I remember once I was watching a video, saying, here's all the hidden racism you do. And it was all different kinds of groups. And one had a Jewish guy saying, is it Levi or is it Levi? And I'm like, that's a fair question to ask because Levi is a Jewish name, like to mispronounce it. I had a grandmother who was Jewish who was my great-grandmother, Levi. She didn't.
And I tell you what, if somebody else comes up to me and says, that's not a knife, I'm just going to lose my crap. I don't mean to make light of this issue, but sounds as trivial. The Levi-Levy distinction sounds as trivial as
I just remember
that's
it a
not
long
a knife.
time. So now some microaggressions, Matt, I do think they border on, it's not racism like malicious, but it's like, oh, you shouldn't really say it. Like if people who said something like, oh wow, you're so eloquent for a black person.
Right.
It's like to me, that is bleeding into racism.
Absolutely.
I don't think the person is malicious.
No, they may not be malicious, but that sounds like a pretty shitty thing to say.
But it's pretty bleeding into, and it is a form of implicit.
But the other thing is, like, we interact with people based on our past experience of what they're like. That's also got to be playing into this as well. I'm not saying that justifies saying to somebody, you're very eloquent for a black person. That sounds like a shitty thing to say to somebody. But, like if your only experience of Australians was this or that, then you naturally are going to assume that the next Australian you meet is going to be like this or that. No? Am I wrong?
We absolutely. And we all do this, and we have to be careful to avoid stereotypes and these kinds of that's what prejudice is. And so we have to treat people as being a son or daughter of God, made in the image of God, and understand that person will have their own backstory, their own emotions, their own things that they have been through. And so we shouldn't let that color our perceptions of people, whether it's their race or, their occupation. I have had a fair number of bad run-ins with the police, for example. I love going out with my wife because when I go to, immigration checkpoints or the police are around, they're super nice because I have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed wife. But then when I'm by myself, I get the third degree.
Is that true? Is that true? I mean, are you not just kind of reading into that? And why is it that you think you're getting the third degree?
It could be whenever I go to a traffic stop, let's say at an immigration, checkpoint on the freeway or something. What happened? When my wife is with me, we go through. Now that could be just because if I'm a single male, they're more suspicious than if I'm married and my wife is with me. But my wife will travel by herself, and she'll go through these things, and they'll just wave her on through.
But your wife is so delightful and smiley.
She's also said that I look
Yes, I can see you looking super stern and which again, that's no reason necessarily for a police officer to treat you differently.
I don't know. So it could be my sex, it could be my disposition, but it also just wouldn't surprise me if I have a bit of a darker complexion to me, and it comes off that way.
So that would be an example of racism.
I believe I was racially profiled when I went to Israel. They proudly do that for their security protocols. I went there with my white father-in-law.
Okay.
And then he went through security and he was fine. And then I was behind him and they said, "You need to go over here." And they just grilled me like nobody's business.
It was the yarmulke.
Right? Well, no, the problem is when I go to Israel,
Israel.
the Jews all think that I'm Muslim, and the Muslim all think that I'm Jewish. And so I'm like, how do I fit in all that? So yeah, we have to avoid all that.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here to watch the full episode. And I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and to our amazing patrons for making all of this possible. Please do us a favor before you go. Click that subscribe button and then the bell. And that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new episode.